From the scorching desert to the depths of the oceans, nature reveals births that push every limit. From males that give birth to offspring that struggle even before they are born, each story is a brutal proof of survival. You're about to discover how life begins under extreme pressure, and why some births feel like true endurance tests. Get ready to see the animal kingdom like never before. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Now, let's get started. Number 10, the most surprising birth, seahorse. When you think about birth in the animal kingdom, you probably imagine a female facing pain, effort, and risk to bring her offspring into the world. But what if I told you there's a species where the male goes through all of this? Yes, in the case of the seahorse, the concept of birth is completely reversed, and still incredibly intense. It all begins with an almost choreographed ritual. The pair slowly approaches, their bodies synchronize, and the female deposits her eggs into a special structure in the male's body, a brood pouch located in the abdominal region. So far, it may seem like just a curious behavior, but what happens next is what makes this one of the most impressive and painful processes in nature. Inside this pouch, the eggs aren't just stored. The male's body takes on an active role, almost like an improvised uterus. He controls salinity, provides oxygen, and regulates the internal environment to ensure the embryos develop. In other words, for days or even weeks, his body works non-stop, undergoing intense hormonal changes. Now imagine this: dozens, sometimes hundreds of embryos growing simultaneously in a limited space. The internal pressure increases, the body begins to expand, and the discomfort grows every day. But the real test begins at the moment of birth. Unlike many animals where birth happens relatively smoothly, the male seahorse enters a state of violent contractions. Yes, contractions. Very similar to those of mammals. His body bends, twists, and begins to expel the offspring through abrupt, repetitive movements. Each contraction demands extreme effort. It's as if the body is being compressed from the inside out, pushing dozens of tiny bodies through a narrow opening. And we're not talking about just a few offspring. In some species, the number can exceed hundreds of mini births happening in sequence. No pause, no rest, no immediate relief. During this process, the male may appear completely out of control. He clings to algae or corals with his tail to avoid being dragged by the force of his own contractions. His body vibrates, pulses, and at times, it looks like he won't make it. It's both fascinating and brutal. And here's what makes it even more intense. Unlike many animals that receive some form of care after birth, seahorse offspring are released directly into the environment, completely on their own. In other words, all that colossal effort guarantees no protection afterward. The father literally goes through one of the most demanding processes in nature, just to release his descendants into a world full of predators. Now think about this. Could you endure dozens or even hundreds of contractions in a row without knowing if it would actually ensure your offspring's survival? This is where the seahorse stops being just a curious animal and becomes a true symbol of resilience. Because in the end, this process isn't just about physical pain, it's about responsibility. It's about carrying, protecting, and at the most critical moment, enduring an extreme level of effort to ensure life continues. And maybe that makes you see this small ocean dweller in a completely different way. Because while many see only a delicate, almost fragile animal, the reality is that it faces one of the most intense births, is in fact an absolute survivor. Number 8, birth in the silence of death, brown bear. Imagine being in the harshest winter possible. Everything around you is frozen, food is gone, water is inaccessible, the world outside feels dead. Now imagine that in this scenario, you have to give birth. Without help, without energy, without even fully waking up. That's exactly what happens with the brown bear. Unlike most animals, the female of this giant doesn't give birth at a moment of strength, but at a moment of extreme vulnerability. Birth happens during hibernation, a state where metabolism slows drastically, the body enters total energy-saving mode, and every movement must be minimized. Yet even in this almost asleep state, nature demands that life goes on. Months earlier, during autumn, the female must eat compulsively. She stores fat as if her life depends on it, because it does. This reserve will be her only energy source throughout the entire winter. including the most critical moment, giving birth. And then the moment arrives. Outside, temperatures can drop far below freezing. Inside the den, it's dark, tight, and silent. And in this isolated place, the contractions begin. But here's what makes this process so terrifying. The female is not fully conscious like other animals during birth. Her body is slow, weakened, operating at the minimum level required to survive. It's as if she's fighting against her own hibernation state. The body needs to wake up just enough to give birth, but without spending too much energy, or she might not survive the winter. Now imagine the effort. Even slowed down, the body must produce contractions. It must expel the cubs. It must deal with pain without having enough energy to react normally. And then something even more remarkable happens. The cubs are born extremely small, almost defenseless, blind, with barely any fur to withstand the cold. Compared to the mother's size, they seem too fragile to survive. But that's exactly why birth happens this way. If the cubs were large, the mother wouldn't have enough energy to sustain them during hibernation. So nature made a cruel, yet efficient choice. Tiny cubs. Less physically demanding birth, but an enormous challenge afterward, because once they're born, the responsibility doesn't decrease, it increases. The mother must keep them warm. She must feed them with highly nutritious milk, produced from the fat she stored months earlier. And all of this without eating anything, without drinking water, without leaving the den, without help. Now think about the level of endurance required for that. Her body is slowly being consumed, energy is running out, and even so, she continues. She protects, she warms, she feeds. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and only when winter begins to ease does she finally leave the den. Thinner, extremely weakened, but with live cubs by her side. And that's when you realize the brown bear's birth isn't just painful, it's silent, invisible, and unbelievably dangerous, because it doesn't happen with screams or intense movement. It happens on the edge between life and death, where any mistake can be fatal. Now let me ask you, could you go through something this extreme with almost no energy, no help, and still sustain another life for months? Because the brown bear does, in silence, in the cold, in the dark. And maybe that's why it's more than just a symbol of strength, it's a symbol of absolute endurance. Number 7, mass birth rabbit. At first glance, the rabbit seems like one of the most delicate animals in nature. Small, agile, almost fragile, but behind this harmless appearance lies one of the most intense and exhausting reproductive processes in the entire animal kingdom. Because here, the problem isn't just the birth, it's the quantity. Everything starts with a simple but impactful fact. The rabbit is one of the most reproductively capable species on the planet. A single female can produce multiple litters throughout the year, and each can contain several offspring. Now imagine this happening inside a very small body. Pregnancy lasts about 28 to 31 days. It seems short, but during this time, the female's body works at high speed. Embryos develop rapidly, taking up space, compressing internal organs, and constantly demanding energy. And then comes the critical moment, birth. Unlike animals that give birth to 1 or 2 large offspring, the rabbit faces something far more chaotic, multiple births in sequence. One, then another, and another, and another, with no significant pause. Each offspring requires a contraction. Each contraction consumes energy, and the body must keep going until the last one. Now think about the intensity of that. It's like running a marathon without knowing when it will end. And all of this happens in an environment where mistakes are not an option. Because the rabbit is prey, that means the birth must be fast and silent. It can't draw attention. It can't take too long. It can't expose the mother to predators. So the body enters emergency mode. Contractions become efficient but intense. The process is accelerated to the maximum, and the female must endure it all while showing almost no external signs. But the most remarkable moment comes right after. As soon as the offspring are born, they are completely defenseless, blind, hairless, unable to move efficiently. And the mother, she can't just stay there. She can't care for them constantly. She can't draw attention. So she does something that seems almost counterintuitive. She leaves. Yes, she hides the offspring and returns only a few times a day to nurse them. Now think about the level of pressure in that. You just went through an exhausting birth. Your body is drained, and even so, you must trust that your offspring will survive alone for hours, without direct protection, without constant presence. It's a game of absolute risk, and it doesn't stop there, because the cycle restarts quickly. Shortly after giving birth, the female can become pregnant again. In other words, no real rest, no full recovery, no pause. It's a continuous cycle of pregnancy, birth, and survival. Now let me ask you, could you go through multiple births in sequence with little recovery time and still keep everything going? Because that's exactly what the rabbit does. And maybe that's why it has become one of nature's greatest symbols of reproduction. Not because it's easy, but because of endurance. Because behind that fragile appearance, there's a body that withstands one of the most intense rhythms nature has ever created. Number 6, the silent and multiplied birth, snake. When you think of a snake, you probably imagine an agile, silent, and highly controlled animal, but what almost no one imagines is what happens when it needs to give birth, because here everything breaks the pattern. First, you need to understand something important. Not all snakes lay eggs. Some species are viviparous or ovoviviparous, meaning the offspring develop inside the mother's body and are born alive. And that's where things start to get intense. During pregnancy, the snake's body undergoes a complete transformation. Unlike mammals, it doesn't have a structure designed exclusively for complex gestation. Even so, it must accommodate multiple embryos along a long, flexible, and relatively narrow body. Now imagine dozens of small bodies forming inside. Space starts to shrink, internal organs are compressed, movement becomes limited, and the entire body must adapt to this growing pressure. But the real challenge begins at the moment of birth. Unlike a single birth or just a few offspring, here we're talking about many, sometimes dozens, and each one needs to come out. Now think about the mechanics of this. The snake has no limbs, no way to assist the process physically like other animals. Everything depends on internal contractions, waves of pressure that travel through the entire body. And then it begins. One offspring is expelled, then another, and another, in sequence. No real pause, no rest. It's like a continuous line of effort where the body must maintain a constant rhythm until the very last birth. And here's an impressive detail. Many times the offspring are born inside a thin membrane, almost like a cocoon, and they must free themselves quickly after leaving the mother's body. In other words, birth is not the end of the challenge, it's just the beginning. Now imagine the level of exhaustion of the mother. Each contraction demands energy, each expulsion requires effort. And since there are many, the process can take time. The body is slowly drained, the muscles reach exhaustion, and still, it has to continue, because stopping halfway is not an option. But what makes this even more extreme is the aftermath. Unlike mammals that care for their young, most snakes simply move on. No parental care, no protection, no return. The offspring are born completely independent, ready or not to face the world. Now think about that for a second. You go through a long, exhausting process, full of effort. And in the end, there is no bond, no protection, no second chance. It's everyone for themselves. And maybe that's what makes this type of birth so impactful. It's not just about physical pain. It's about intensity without emotional reward. It's about pure effort in its rawest form. Now tell me, could you go through something this extreme, release dozens of lives, and simply move on as if nothing happened? Because that's exactly what the snake does. Silent, resilient, and absolutely relentless. Number 5, the birth of rigid structures, Stingray. If you've seen difficult, painful, and exhausting births so far, the Stingray takes it to another level, because here, we're not just talking about size, quantity, or extreme environments. We're talking about something even more challenging, giving birth to offspring that already have well-formed structures inside a body that must adapt to that internally. It all starts in a way that already breaks the pattern. Many stingrays are ovoviviparous. This means the embryos develop inside the mother's body, protected until they are practically ready to face the world. world. In other words, they are not fragile offspring, they are not simple structures. They are already well-developed organisms, and that completely changes the level of difficulty of birth. During pregnancy, the stingray's body must sustain these growing embryos. They don't just stay still, they develop, move, and occupy space inside an organism that, although adapted to aquatic life, has well-defined physical limits. Now imagine this scenario. Time passes, the offspring grow, their bodies begin to take shape, structure, and even features that in another context could be dangerous. And then comes the critical moment, birth. Unlike many fish that release eggs or larvae, the stingray must expel fully formed offspring. And here's what makes it even more intense. These offspring are not soft or undefined. They have structured bodies, developed fins, and a shape that must pass through the birth canal. Now, think about the effort required. Each contraction must push a relatively large, already formed body. The internal space is limited, and the process must happen without causing fatal damage to the mother. It's a delicate balance between strength and resistance. But what makes this even more impressive is the shape of these offspring. Stingrays have flat, wide bodies with wing-like fins. For birth to happen, these offspring must come out in an adjusted way, often with their bodies partially folded or compressed. In other words, it's not just pushing, it's adapting, it's aligning, it's forcing the body to allow something that is naturally difficult. And all of this happens while the mother's organism is under extreme pressure. Each contraction requires energy, each movement must be precise, and any mistake can cause serious internal injuries. Now imagine this happening more than once, because depending on the species, it's not just one offspring, there are several, one after another, repeating the same exhausting process. No significant rest, no immediate relief, it's a sequence of continuous effort, and when it finally ends, there is no long pause, no guaranteed full recovery. The mother must go back to swimming, must keep moving, must survive, and the offspring, as in many cases in nature, they're already on their own. Now let me ask you, could you endure a process where the very shape of what's being born makes everything harder, where each step demands not just strength, but constant adaptation? Because that's exactly what the stingray faces. And maybe after understanding this, you'll never see this animal as just something calm gliding through the water again. Behind that smooth movement, there's an incredible level of endurance. A body that withstands one of the most challenging processes in the aquatic world. Number 4, the birth of the largest being to ever exist, blue whale. Before anything else, you need to understand one essential point. The blue whale is not just a big animal, it is the largest living being to have ever existed in the history of Earth. Bigger than any dinosaur, bigger than any creature that has ever walked, swum, or flown. Now imagine this, an animal of that size, giving birth. The very concept already seems absurd, but reality is even more intense. It all starts long before birth. A blue whale's pregnancy lasts about 10 to 12 months. During this time, the female's body must sustain the growth of an offspring that is not just big. It is born measuring around 7 meters, 23 feet, and can weigh close to 2 to 3 tons. Yes, the baby is already the size of a small bus. Now stop and think about that for a second. This is not a normal birth. This is the expulsion of a massive body in an environment that doesn't make anything easier. Because unlike solid ground, all of this happens in the ocean, and that's where the real challenge begins. Unlike land mammals, the blue whale cannot simply lie down and give birth. She must keep swimming, she must stay stable, she must control her position in the water, and at the same time, deal with contractions. Now imagine the level of coordination required, a body weighing dozens of tons, performing precise movements, while going through one of the most demanding moments of its existence. The contractions begin, and unlike what many people imagine, they are not gentle, they are powerful, intense, deep. Each contraction is a massive force applied internally to push a huge body through the birth canal. Internal pressure rises, muscles work at their limit, and all of this must happen without compromising the mother's ability to stay alive in that environment. Because there's a crucial detail. A whale needs to breathe air. Now imagine the complexity of that. While in labor, she still needs to rise to the surface, breathe, and go back down, without losing control of the process, without completely interrupting the birth, without collapsing. It's an extremely delicate balance between two vital needs, to breathe and to give birth. And then comes the most critical moment, the birth. Unlike humans, where the baby is born head first, in the case of the blue whale, the calf is usually born tail first. And that's not by chance, it's a survival strategy. If the head came out first, the calf might try to breathe before being fully out and would drown. So nature solved this in the most efficient way possible. But that doesn't make the process easier. Quite the opposite. The mother's body must push a gigantic calf in a controlled way until it is completely out. And only then can it rise to the surface to take its first breath. Now imagine the final effort, the last sequence of contractions, the most intense, the most demanding, the moment when the body must give everything it has left, and then the calf is number 3, the repetitive and silently painful birth. Chicken. When you think of a chicken, the first image that probably comes to mind is simple. A common animal, a calm routine, laying eggs every day. But what almost no one stops to think about is this. What if this seemingly simple process is actually one of the most repetitive, exhausting, and painful in the animal kingdom? Because unlike many animals that go through birth only a few times in life, the chicken goes through it almost every single day. It all starts inside her body. Forming an egg is not instant. It's a complex process that can take around 24 to 26 hours to complete. During that time, the chicken's body works continuously, layer by layer, forming what will eventually become a rigid structure. And here's the key point, rigid. We're not talking about something flexible or adaptable like a mammal offspring. We're talking about a hard-shelled structure made of calcium that must pass through a relatively narrow internal canal. Now think about that for a second. Every single day, the body needs to produce something solid and push it out. As the hours pass, the egg fully forms. It reaches its final size and begins to create internal pressure. Nearby organs are compressed, discomfort increases, and the body prepares for the most critical moment, laying the egg, and then the contractions begin. Yes, contractions. Just like in other animals, the chicken's body must generate force to expel the egg. But here's the difference. Each contraction is dealing with something rigid, no shape adaptation, no flexibility, no natural adjustment to the exit canal. It's as if the body is trying to push something hard through a limited space, repeatedly, day after day. Now imagine the accumulated effort. One day, then another, then another. No real rest, no full recovery, no pause. It's a continuous cycle. Produce, press, expel, repeat. And when something goes wrong, the situation can become extremely serious. There's a condition known as egg binding. When that happens, the egg simply cannot come out. It gets stuck, and the body keeps trying to expel it. The contractions continue, the effort increases, the strain grows, and the risk of death becomes real. Now, think about the level of that. You're trapped in a cycle where your own body is trying to solve something that isn't working. No help, no immediate relief, but even when everything goes normally, the process is far from easy. With every egg, there is effort, there is pressure, there is physical wear, and this repeats hundreds of times throughout life. And here's a detail many people ignore. In nature, chickens were not designed to produce eggs at this extreme frequency. This intense rhythm is the result of selective breeding and domestication over time. In other words, their bodies are operating under constant demand, always at the limit, always repeating the same process. Now, let me ask you something. Could you go through a physically? Number 2, the birth that begins with cannibalism, great white shark. If there is a process in the animal kingdom that completely redefines what it means to be born, it's this one, because here, unlike anything you've seen so far, survival begins before life truly starts. It all begins in a place that should be safe, the mother's womb, a place that for most living beings represents protection, development, and calm growth. But in the case of the great white shark, that couldn't be further from the truth. Inside the female's body, embryos begin to form. At first, everything seems relatively normal, small, fragile, dependent, but that phase doesn't last long, because very quickly, these embryos enter a stage where nature removes any form of artificial protection. They begin to develop at an incredible rate. Their bodies elongate, their structures strengthen, and then something happens that changes everything. They develop teeth. Now stop and think about that carefully. You're not dealing with defenseless creatures. You're dealing with predators in formation, beings that already possess natural weapons before they are even born. And here comes the most brutal part of the process. Inside the womb, there is no infinite space, no unlimited resources, no equality. There is competition, pure, direct, relentless. And then it begins. The larger, stronger, faster embryos Start attacking the smaller ones. They bite, they tear, they devour. They simply eliminate any competition. This process is known as intrauterine cannibalism, but the technical name doesn't even come close to capturing its real impact, because in practice, it's natural selection happening before birth. Now think about that level of intensity. While you imagine a calm environment inside the mother's body, what's actually happening is a violent struggle for survival. No rules, no pause, no second chances. And the mother, she carries all of it, without being able to interfere, without being able to stop it, without being able to control it. Her body is not just sustaining life, it's sustaining an environment where death is also part of the process. As time passes, the number of embryos decreases, not by chance, but because only the strongest remain, the survivors, the winners of this first battle. And that leads to another problem, size. The survivors keep growing, and they grow fast. They become larger, heavier, stronger, more complete. Now imagine the impact on the mother's body. Internal space becomes increasingly limited, pressure rises, internal movement becomes more intense, and her body has to deal with all of it at once. But the worst is yet to come, because the moment arrives when these survivors need to come out. And we're not talking about small offspring, we're talking about already formed versions of one of the most efficient predators on the planet. They are born large, muscular, active, and fully functional. Now imagine the birth. The mother's body must expel creatures. Number 1, the most unlikely birth in nature. Kangaroo. If you had to choose an animal to represent a difficult birth, you might think of something big, strong, imposing. But the kangaroo completely breaks that logic, because here, the challenge isn't the size of the offspring, it's how unbelievably vulnerable it is at birth. It all starts in a way that almost seems simple. The female becomes pregnant, gestation occurs, but unlike most mammals, it lasts a very short time. Around 30 to 36 days, yes, while other animals spend months or even years developing their offspring inside the body. The kangaroo interrupts this process very early, and that changes everything, because what is born can barely be called an offspring. Now pay close attention to this. A baby kangaroo is born at about 2 centimeters long, smaller than a human thumb, hairless, blind, without functional hearing, with organs still forming, and with a level of development that, in any other animal, would be considered unviable for survival outside the mother's body. Now think about that. You're not witnessing a complete birth, you're witnessing a being that should still be inside the body, being forced to survive on the outside. And this is where the most unbelievable part begins. As soon as it is born, the newborn cannot just stay still, cannot wait, cannot be carried. It must move on its own. Yes, a practically embryonic being must perform one of the most important journeys of its existence. It must leave the birth area and climb all the way to the mother's pouch. Now imagine this scene carefully. The mother is there, the newborn is born, tiny, fragile, exposed, and then it starts to crawl without seeing, without full coordination, without real strength, but with a single instinct programmed by nature, reach the pouch. This journey may seem small to you, but for it, it's like climbing a mountain. Every movement is extreme effort. Every advance requires energy. Every second outside the pouch is a risk, because there, any mistake means death. If it falls, it's over. If it loses the path, it's over. If it doesn't have enough strength, it's over. Now think about the precision required. This newborn must find the correct path, guided only by instinct, no learning, no prior attempt, no margin for error. And the mother, she barely helps. That's what makes it even more impressive. She positions her body, creates the conditions, but she doesn't pick the newborn up. She doesn't carry it to the pouch. Everything depends on it. Now imagine the level of biological trust in that. Its entire survival depends on a single path, a single journey, a single moment. And then, if everything goes right, it arrives. But it's still not over, not even close. Inside the pouch, there's a new challenge. The newborn must find a nipple, and more than that, it must attach to it, because from that moment on, it will remain literally fixed there for weeks. The nipple swells inside the newborn's mouth. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed our content, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Also, check out other interesting videos that are appearing on your screen right now, and I'll see you in the next video. See you next time.